Thank you very much for inviting me here. Many of you probably look at me and are wondering, what the hell is that guy doing up here? And the answer to that question is surprisingly simple. As you would say in criminal jargon, I best fit the description. So I'm an academic, I'm 33 years old, and in my entire life I never held a job that would have existed if it wasn't for Timothy and what he did when he was 33 years old and an academic. So in my life, I worked with a lot of companies. I worked with a manufacturer of air mattresses. I worked with a travel agency. And when I didn't work with organizations, I studied them and tried to find out how they use digital tools in general and the web in particular. And at some point, that became my vocation. And so, because I do that as my life and I work at that, it's only natural that I ask myself, well, how did it actually come to be? How did Berners-Lee, when he was 33, came up with inventing the web? And when I wonder about that, I would like to start with a very wild speculation, given that I'm the same age and more or less the same profession. I would speculate that he was probably desperate. And that's because you got to understand, as a young academic, desperation is kind of the fuel that we work on. A lot of scientific progress happens because of desperation. So it's safe to assume that to some degree he probably was desperate. In his case, I guess he was desperate because information at CERN got lost in the corridors and didn't leave the offices it was created in. But also, I guess, that he was desperate because he needed money. And now, as a young researcher, you have to understand when I mean that a young researcher needs money, I'm not talking fancy money to buy jewelry and sports cars. I mean money to continue doing what we're passionate about, what we really like doing, which is research. And so, because we are passionate about what we're doing, we try to find that money. And that's kind of complicated as a young scholar because we cannot go to a bank and take out a loan. We have to go to research institutions and funding organizations and hand in grant proposals and hope that one of these grant proposals sticks and someone gives us money in exchange so we can continue doing what we like doing, which is research. And so in 1989, Berners-Lee wrote what today is probably considered the most famous grant application of all time. And he handed it in, and at the time his boss, Mike Sandel, marked the proposal with 3 little words, which are today considered the most famous term paper marks in scientific history. And as you probably all know, he wrote vague but exciting. So let's go back a little bit and dissect what's happened. So prior to writing this proposal, Berners-Lee had worked on hypertext. And so he had this idea that it should be possible to transfer this concept of hypertext to the internet and create an infrastructure that would allow researchers to publish and connect information. And these published parts of information are nowadays called websites, and these connections are nowadays called links. So in many regards, we can understand the web as a direct consequence of prior inventions. Hypertext on individual machines was already there, so was the internet. And to merge these two concepts was in some degree the next logical step. And we know from history of science that important inventions are oftentimes less the brainchilds of geniuses as they are the results of a certain zeitgeist. And we know from creativity research that almost all ideas are recombinations of known building blocks. And so we have to understand at a certain time, a couple of building blocks are there, and they basically wait for someone to come along to connect them in a certain way. This is also the reason why we have things like multiple discovery. This is famous story of Charles Darwin, who was in the midst of writing on the origin of species when he received a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, which contained basically the same idea. And so we got to understand inventions are to some degree a function of time. And by the way, Tim Berners-Lee is the first to admit this. In a talk he gave a couple years ago, he even went so far as to boil his entire life's achievement down to one simple sentence, and he said, and I quote, I was at the right place at the right time. It's pretty safe to agree with him. If it wasn't for Berners-Lee, someone else would probably have invented the web. Probably called it something different, but it would have happened. And so when we stand here and we give this award to Berners-Lee, we have to ask, where does that leave him? Was he really just lucky to be at the right place at the right time? Or was there a little bit more to that story? And I would like to offer a little bit of a different explanation and argue that Tim's achievement is not in what he invented, but in how he invented it. And by how, I don't mean how he meditated about combining hypertext and the internet. I mean the rules that he came up with to govern his invention. And this how he invented it, this is kind of the kicker. That's the crucial part of the story. And for the how he invented it, we cannot give Berners-Lee enough credit for exactly this. So it's basically what we learned. It's safe to assume that the web would have happened without Berners-Lee. But it's also safe to assume that it probably would have had a complete different set of rules. And these set of rules, this is important, and to understand that we have to look a little bit into how academic infrastructure projects work. So basically, academic infrastructure projects have two sides to them. They have a development side, someone needs to build the thing, and they have a maintenance side. Once it is built, someone has to keep that thing going. And so in my job, I look at a lot of research proposals, and most of them solely focus on the development side. So they come up with an idea and say, well, this is what we would like to create, and not with a single word they mention how they will make sure that it gets maintained. In funding lingo, we also call these projects zombie projects, because they basically live at the mercy of some postdoc somewhere making sure that the project gets maintained. And then there's a second group of projects. They very much care about the maintenance, and usually they say the following. Listen, we will build a proprietary system, and either users or advertisers will pay us, so we keep that thing going. And this is exactly what Tim Berners-Lee didn't do. And why this is so important becomes obvious when we look at the impact of Berners-Lee's invention. So today, when we're bored and we don't know what to do, we go to Reddit. And if someone has a birthday, we go to Amazon and order a present. And then we come back home and we see all the presents we received from someone else. And we need to declutter and we decide to put them on eBay. And Berners-Lee didn't think of Amazon or eBay or Reddit when he wrote that proposal. But all three of them probably wouldn't have happened had someone else invented the web. Somehow, he performed this magic trick of making this invention so open and so flexible that almost instantly a community formed that did not only maintain the web, but developed it further in a completely unprecedented way. And to Berners-Lee's credit, it was his deliberate decision to make the web open to further developments. He could have very easily transferred his idea into a spin-off, restricted use and monetize it the same way many other internet technologies do, but he didn't. And as such, he developed the ultimate meta-invention of our time and basically paved the way for thousands of platforms and services that nowadays shape all our lives. And when I look at my own life, we covered my inability to find a job that has nothing to do with the web. But even outside of work, Berners-Lee's invention defines who I am. Well, it's not entirely true. I met my girlfriend in high school, not on a dating platform. But even in high school, I had a dreadful English teacher, and it didn't teach me much. So I went to the web. I found a TV show called South Park, and with that, I learned English. And later on, I studied as an engineer, and I had one of those teachers, or one of those professors in electrical engineering, and he was more on the research side than on the teaching side. And so again, I turned to the web and learned electrical engineering no matter what. And only a couple of days ago, my bike broke down and I had to fix it. I had no idea how to repair the damn thing. But I went to the web and I found out how, and now it's fixed. And these aren't rare examples. This is everyday life. When we have a problem, the first place we go is the web. And it is therefore impossible to thank Berners-Lee enough for what he did. And at the same time, we shouldn't reduce his role to the invention of the web, but stress that he created the open web and with that, kicked off an avalanche of ideas that now shape what we do with our lives. So let us never forget how crucial openness was to the entire story that I told you. And whenever we see those sneaky corporations that try to limit the web's openness, we should recall how little the web would mean to us had Berners-Lee done the very same. Thank you.